So, um, let me just say Ankh and Ma'at and good evening to all of you. It's good to see you all. I want to simply say that listen, doing this online can be a challenge, right? It would have been helpful if in November, someone told us, hey, you are going to be locked in your house starting sometime in early March. Why don't we all learn how to use Google Meet and Zoom? Wouldn't that have been helpful? Why don't we, none of us would have been sick in the first place? So trying to figure out how to do this can be a little challenging if you're not someone who uses these digital meeting groups very often. So I know that some of you, Hetepu, I know that some of you actually might be a little bit less familiar with this format. Let me say a few quick things. First off, let me say to you that we are going to be using the same link every week. So that same link that I sent you in the first email, that's the link for the class every week. I'm not going to change it because changing it, I think, would cause more confusion. Then you'd have to wait for the email, look for the email, look for the link. Just know that the same room that we're in is the one that you're going to use. So I'm going to show you something here. I'm going to present my screen for a second. And as I'm presenting my screen, you're going to see, you probably will see yourself, right? So wave to yourself. Hey, what's up? There I go. Just know that if you are trying to save this particular room, I would suggest you just bookmark it. So you don't even have to go into the email to get into the room, okay? So I'm using Google Chrome. Some of you may be using another browser. Maybe you're using Internet Explorer, or as they've rebranded it, Microsoft Edge. But if you're using Google Chrome, here's an easy way to make sure that you always have the link and you don't have to search for the email. You don't have to click the link in the same way. As you look at my screen, you should notice right here a little star. Can you see that? You see the star? Give me a thumbs up if you see the star. Yes. If you click this star, you're going to see it gives you a drop down. From here, now I already created this link, so mine says bookmarks bar under folder. What I normally, it'll be on all sorts of other things. But I would select bookmarks bar right here. See this one says bookmarks bar? If you click bookmarks bar and hit done, you're going to see that the link is right here. So I have several links that I go to very quickly here. Can you see this? This one says Meet, and it has the link here. You could even change the name here by clicking on that, right-clicking on the link and saying, wait, let me do it again. Edit. And I'm going to call it 3 Millennia class. Oops. Let me just switch that. And then I'm going to hit save. And so now, right here on my bookmarks bar, right up here at the top, whenever I open up my browser, I'm going to see this Meet link here. And when I click it, it will bring me into the class. So now you don't have to always look for the link. Does that make sense? How many of you felt like you needed for me to email you the link every week? Is this helpful? Yes? Some of you did. But is this helpful? Yeah? Now listen, if you can't get in, you can always text me or call me. Brother Shahid just called right before the class, and I'll help you get in, okay? Does that make sense? But we want to make sure that you are able to use the technology as best you can so that you are then able to enjoy all the other aspects of the class. So that you're able to get into the area where your texts are, for example. If you're able to do that, then you're going to be able to appreciate the class on a much higher level. And the syllabus is in there too. Now, I know that most of you actually are probably part of the Facebook group. Some of you declined to do it that way. So then what's going to happen is when I record the session, I'm probably going to email you. I guess it's a little bit more work for me, but I'm going to email you the link to the YouTube group, to the YouTube page, right? All of the rest of you who are part of the Facebook group, you'll just see I'll put the video in the Facebook group every week. I'm talking about the recording of the class, so that if you need to, you can go back and look at it. And let's say you're not able to make class. This is one of the benefits of doing an online class as opposed to an in-person class. At least you get the recording of the class, right? I know that for many years as a student, I attended classes. I never got a recording of the class, right? In fact, I remember that I used to ask folks for the notes sometimes, and they would say no. So, and then there were other times I would ask for notes, and their notes didn't help me because for whatever reason, whatever they were doing didn't help me understand what I needed to understand, or I didn't understand their handwriting, or all those other challenges could actually happen. An online class is helpful in the sense that usually when folks are running classes online, they're recorded. And so you can do it that way. Okay, so let me stop presenting. Now, let me say to you tonight that we're intending to move relatively quickly tonight because I want to make sure that we're able to get through all of the material in the weeks that we have in front of us. I also want for us to be able to get a chance to really begin to churn and to really master the information. And so that's one of the reasons why I want to be able to move a little bit quickly tonight. But before we begin, let me go ahead and ask the ancestors, ask the Neteru, ask the divine entities to come forward, to open our eyes, to make our hearing precise, to make our thoughts absolutely clear as we attempt to gather information on their excellence. We ask you, ancestors, to visit this room, to visit each of the rooms of our scholars, because we believe that with your guidance, we will be able to understand your commitment, your legacy, your contributions, and your struggle. And we believe that if you follow us along this journey, we will be able to emulate your greatest work, complete your unfinished tasks, and to stand on your shoulders to reach higher than you were able to in your day on the physical plane. We say ashe, ashe, ashe. We say tuan ter. Whatever word you say, feel comfortable saying. Because it is clear that this will be more than a scholarly journey. I view this as a journey in understanding the contributions of those people who have attempted to seed a path before us. Unfortunately, there are those individuals outside of our community that sought to keep us away from this path. And so we are asking for our ancestors' guidance to illuminate the way forward as we begin to understand them. So let me ask, how was your reading, scholars? How was your reading? Uh-oh, Sen-Tyree gave me one of those, okay, but a little challenging. I saw some thumbs though. Were you able to complete your reading? Yes. Sinet Kefara said yes. Monica said yes.
Yes.
Good. I'm hearing some voices. That was Sinet Lisa, right? It sounds like you are getting your reading done. That is excellent. It is important that you do the reading, because if you really want to master this story, the classes are wonderful, but doing the classes and the reading are what are going to really get you to get into this information in excellence, okay? So, are there any questions, comments, concerns, particularly about what you read with regard to the story, the narrative that we're sharing? Sen-Tyree, I see your hand.
Yes, but two questions. In the African Origins of Civilization, Diop on page 7, he it seems like he theorizes that he was talking about the curse of Ham.
Mm-hmm.
And he seems to theorize that the term Ham derived from the term Cam, which is a derivative of Kemet. Can you comment on that? Is that true? He didn't provide a source.
Well, let me say to you that many scholars make that argument. Many scholars believe that when some of the early biblical authors were, I shouldn't even say biblical, some of the early Hebrew authors were writing that, they were referring to the nation of Kemet. When you later look at the table of nations that can be generated from reading the text, you're going to see that some of the nations that are connected to Kemet are along that line. So it seems like when they were mentioning Ham, they might have been mentioning Kemet. Now, I want you to get something here that hopefully will be easy to digest, but for some may be a little bit more difficult to digest. I want you to understand that the story of, in fact, all of the biblical stories were written by human beings, and they had different aims. So I don't want you to think that the text is like writ in lightning on stone by a divine entity. These were written by human beings, and they had different aims and different perspectives, right? And so for them to describe the relationship between Canaan and Ham, understand that I will argue, this is not something we're going to argue extensively in this class, I think that what was happening is that they were attempting to make a political argument against the people that they were living amongst. Those people who were making that argument, today some scholars and some anthropologists argue that the early Hebrews were the Canaanites. That in fact, the people that are considered the Hebrew people came out of Canaanite culture, came out of Canaanite spirituality, were actually ethnically and racially Canaanites, but they viewed themselves differently and therefore created a different nation. And they were really upset about the fact that for most of Canaanite history, it was under the control of who? Under the control of Kemet. And so that's why they actually talk about Ham's work, but then don't you think it's interesting that in the Bible, Ham is the one that does the stuff, but Noah doesn't curse Ham? We call it the curse of Ham, but who does Noah curse?
Canaan.
He curses Canaan, the son of Ham. So they're trying to get at the Canaanites. They're saying you're nothing but the children of Ham. This is a political description. They are making an argument for the difference between them and those people that were ethnically, culturally, and racially similar to them. Keep in mind that some of the names that are used are clearly Canaanite names. So, for example, you could say that these Hebrew individuals will call themselves the children of Israel, right? Mm-hmm. Have you ever looked at what what scholars translate Israel to mean?
It's the house of El, right?
It actually means El persist. El is the name of the Canaanite deity. How could you name yourself from the deity of a people that you are talking about? Well, understand that they could be seen as Canaanites themselves, but Canaanites that separated themselves from the other people that were Canaan. Does that make sense?
It does.
And so that's one of the reasons why the discussion around the curse of Ham, the discussion around the sons of Noah, should be seen, I would argue, and it's not just me. There are many scholars that would make this argument. Scholars that have studied this particular subject at a more at a deeper level than I have I'm looking for some of the books that I would just reference off the top of my head, off the top of my shelf, really, for you. They actually argue now that they were bubbling up out of Canaanite culture, and so they were making this argument that they were Canaanites, but their story was to describe the story of the curse of Ham was to describe their existence. And so, yes, let me just go back to what you were saying. Sheikh Anta Diop does use the curse of Ham here. He's not saying he believes the curse of Ham, but he references the curse of Ham to try to explain perhaps how some of the people in the ancient world were trying to grapple with the role of Kemet. Make sense?
It does. And second question, real quickly. Yeah. On page, I believe 12, there's an illustration of Lord Terra Netter. So in all of my study of the chronology of Kemet, it always begins with Namr, but it says here that the Negro Anu race were the first inhabitants of Kemet. Can you clarify that, please?
Well, I want you to understand that Namr, as we talked about Namr, have we talked about Namr extensively? We have. Namr is the person who puts together the nation of Kemet. In this instance, what Sheikh Anta Diop is trying to do is he's trying to describe how the area got peopled. So I don't think that he would be making the case that Lord Terra Netter, as he calls him, is the first ruler of Kemet, but rather a description of how the region got populated. Because even when Namr gets there, there are people already there. Namr already has the white crown, remember? That means that he's in what we might consider today southern Kemet. And he does battle with the people on the north who have the red crown. Remember we had this conversation last week? Mm-hmm. And his battle to put together these two lands is what creates Kemet. And then for the next 3,000 years, 3,000 plus years, Kemet is considered, sometimes when people refer to it, they say the two lands.
So is Lord Netter a historical figure or
not clear? Not clear. Not clear. Lord Terra Netter exists in a period where obviously history is murky. Because even when we talk about the Kemetic story, remember when we were looking at the Palette of Namr, I said that it clearly had some writing on it.
Yes.
But you're not going to find like paragraphs and sentences. This is early in the history of writing. Human beings existed for literally millions of years before writing existed. And so when we see ancient Kemet come into its power, we are actually seeing a time when writing comes into prominence. And so now we're able to read text to understand things. But before that period, for the most part, what we had to do is look at simply the archaeological data. We couldn't actually read text to think of what people were thinking about the period they lived in. So Lord Terra Netter is not in a period where writing actually occurs. Make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Right. Other questions about your reading? Yes, Senet Kapara.
So my question is about, okay, so on page 67, Manetho.
67 of Diop or 67 of?
67 of Chronicle.
Okay.
Manetho, am I saying that right? I don't know.
Yes, you are.
Okay, for instance, describes Nitocris as braver than all the men of her time. Cool. Mm-hmm. The most beautiful of all the women. Cool. Yeah. But then fair skin with red cheeks. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to get a overstanding of if our ancient ancestors traveled all over the world, as we know, and that's been documented, are we saying that Kemet was like Black African-based society, but had intermingled and brought so many different people in? Or are we saying because we were the birth like the birthers of all nations, that we actually were birthing different colors of people during this time? Because I'm trying to figure out how this person is fair skinned with red cheeks. Like, I'm fair skinned, I don't have red cheeks. You know? So I'm trying to say,
I say you have red cheeks. Looking at your cheeks right there. Let me say something interesting to you. I honestly believe that as we are looking at the history of ancient Africa, until we have a large cadre of scholars who have the highest level credentials, who have the highest level experience in archaeology, anthropology, linguistics, and have access to all the sources, we are going to be, unfortunately, sifting through some of the information of other people. This is why I said in our, I think this is our second, was it the second class? Might have been the second class. I was saying one of the things we must do is we must support individuals to obtain those credentials so that we're able to tell our own story entirely. Part of the challenge that we have is that we have to look at what other people say. We have to read E.A. Wallace Budge. We have to read other people who may be looking at this information from a European perspective. That doesn't mean that we should not read them, but it does mean that when we read them, we have to, as my mother used to say, eat the meat and leave the bones. So sometimes when you read something like that, that puts a question mark in your head, now it's time for you to continue to hone your skills. So guess what you'll be able to do? Go and read the Manetho passage for yourself. What does fair-skinned mean for Manetho? Does he mean that she has beautiful skin? Because fair-skinned has a connotation today that Manetho may not have meant. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that in translating what he said, Western scholars could have said, oh, he's saying fair skin. Is that what Manetho was saying? You're going to have to read that for yourself.
And red cheeks, though?
Well, red cheeks are something that you could have. It depends on what image is conjured in your head when you hear those things. Your skin can be reddish in complexion. My wife and I usually tease each other because our complexions, we always argue who's lighter and who's darker. By the way, she's not on right now, so I can say I'm a little lighter than she is. Right? But we have this argument. She's probably watching and said, I heard that. She's going to text me and say, I heard that. So the thing that we often articulate is the fact that my brownish tone has a more yellow tone and her brownish tone has a more orangish tone. If you look at her skin, can you say that her skin is reddish? I think that some people might say it's reddish, even though she's brown. So it depends on the context that you are saying something. This is the challenge of history. Because when we try to bring an ancient context into our modern context, sometimes we get it right, and sometimes we leave something left to be desired. And so now, if that is a question you have, and it's a question I have, now it's time for you to get the text of Manetho to read what he says yourself. Did he mention what Manetho's text was called?
I don't think so.
You want to hear something interesting? Most of Manetho's text has been destroyed. Sometimes we're only able to understand that someone read this incredible book because someone else's work who survived said, this book was so important to me. Can you imagine if you were reading Cheikh Anta Diop and he said, in order to understand this, you must read, I don't know, he wouldn't, no, let's say this. Let's say that you were reading, here's another very important scholar. Let's say you were reading 9 Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization by Brother Anthony Browder. You'll understand why I'm making why I switched books in a second. So this book comes out in the 90s. This book comes out earlier, right? Imagine if you were reading a Nile Valley Contribution to Civilization and he said, the most important book in my study was this book, Cheikh Anta Diop's book. But as you search for that book, you realize that this book was destroyed. There are no copies of it. And that the only way you understand what Cheikh Anta Diop wrote is through the words of Anthony Browder. We actually have that occur in history. There are several times where ancient authors describe ancient books that there are no extant copies. And so then all we can do is understand that earlier book through the writings of the other author. Most of Manetho's work, which was some scholars translate as Egyptiaca today, has been destroyed. But all we can do is look at the large segments that were copied in other books. That's another challenge of historians. And I'm going to say to you, you might say, well, how does a book get destroyed? Today we have books that go out of print, right? Right? You've heard that books are out of print. And so now you have to try to find a copy. In fact, if you are a bibliophile like myself, sometimes you'll be looking for an old book and you'll realize that because it's out of print, you have to actually go to the author to see if they have extra copies of their own book, or you have to try to buy a used copy that's circulated someplace in the universe. When you do that, sometimes you will see that the book is an astronomical price. Astronomical price, because it's out of print. You got to get it from only the ones that are left around. That happens. I know, oh goodness, what's the name? The origin of the word amen. I know Dr. Jahi Issa is one of the authors. I'm trying to, he's going to kill me that I'm forgetting his name right now. That's one of the books that you might see that happen with. It's a book that is not old, but it's out of print. In order for you to get a copy of the book, I know in order for me to get a copy of the book, I had to literally go to Dr. Jahi Issa and get it from him. Oh, and Dr. Salim Faraji. They were the ones that wrote the book. Now the book costs about $25. Because it's out of print and you have to just find what's left, look at how much it is on Amazon. Can you see my screen? Look at how much that book is. $319. When I told Dr. Issa this, he was like, brother, I was about to give you a signed copy for $30. I was like, about to? Are you going to change your mind? Understand that we are in a very interesting period, scholars. We are in a period where we actually are flush with information, flush with books. We can actually take up our smartphone, and this smartphone gives me more access than perhaps all of the libraries that I studied in at Cornell University as a young student. All of them. And when I was a young student, because Jabari is getting old, there was really no internet. It was in its infancy. You didn't get much on the internet. I had to put on my jeans, put on my boots, and walk to the library, right? Cornell had 28 libraries. Sometimes I'd go to one library and they say, oh no, it's not at this library, it's at another library. You got to walk on the other side of campus, another 3 miles to get that book. That's what I had to do, right? We have an embarrassment of riches. Some of you who are older remember you might have had an argument with a friend about something trivial like a movie or a song. And said, that song came out in 82. They say, nah, that song was 86. It was 82, 86. Y'all could argue for 4 or 5 hours. Those arguments are ended these days. You just Google it, right? We have an embarrassment of riches in our hands. So we may not understand that information is that sometimes it's lost. And when you then couple it with the fact that we have groups of people who literally destroyed information, who burned books, who torched libraries, you can get the fact that this information, you have to become a detective of the ancient world to pull some of this story forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but brother, just if I could restate, just to make sure I have the check for understanding, you're saying this passage here is really my modern understanding of what fair skin and red.
No, not your understanding. I'm saying it's the author's understanding. He's talking from a Western perspective.
Okay, so he's just so.
He might be.
This is still Black Africans we're talking about. They might be different shades, but still all Black Africans. Okay, that's why I wanted to just.
He got his own stuff going on here. That's the reason why I said to you, it's a really good book, but it's not perfect, right?
Okay.
He got his own stuff. When you read it, you're gonna every now and then you're gonna be like, "Oh, this is really good," and you're gonna read something. You can be like, "Ooh, what is he talking about?"
Yeah.
He got his own biases that he actually also has.
Okay.
I'm not accusing you of the one with the bias. I'm accusing Peter Clayton as the one with the bias.
Okay.
I guarantee you that when Manetho said fair-skinned or something similar to that, because fair-skinned wasn't a term in his language, and with red cheeks, he didn't use those terms. That's an interpretation of later people.
Okay.
So now what you have to do as the scholars, you have to go back and read what Manetho wrote. Does that make sense?
Oh, because what they're representing that Manetho said here is probably not what he said. They changed. They done changed it.
I'm saying that he gets that from his own perspective.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
And we're all going to do that because remember, Manetho was not even writing in English. Manetho was writing in an early form of Greek. Now, Manetho, as an ancient scholar, is likely a native Kemetic person. It's believed that he was a priest in a temple, and that what he was attempting to do, now that the Greeks are in control of Kemet, he's saying, if you're going to be here, you need to understand the people. So he writes this history of Kemet for the Greeks. You're here, you need to understand it. That's what Egyptiaca was. And so that is part of the challenge that we're going to have. We have to sift through the information to find where we're going to get the most powerful information. I'm going to tell you that as I've been doing this for a while, sometimes I read a really good book and I then argue with the author. I've been around long enough now that I argue with authors sometimes. I mentioned to you that I was a young whippersnapper, a young radical student in Africana studies, and I had the nerve to argue a European scholar who was doing some great work, but I thought that he said something I disagreed with. And so I challenged him to a debate. And he accepted. And he cleaned the floor with me. I was not prepared to make the arguments I was making. I learned a lot that day. And so what I'm saying to you is that these are things that we have to be able to do. Okay? All right. Any other questions, comments before we shift about your reading? I'm assuming you got to parts of it, right? Listen, today I'm going to start asking you questions. You know that, right? Because I'm going to want to see how far you got. Okay, here's a question, since you all are being quiet. Who is the ruler that is believed to have, who was the ruler who is believed to have ruled for the longest period in human history? What was his name? And how long did he rule? Come on now, don't let me hear digital crickets. No digital crickets.
It was either 64 or 94 years, depending on if he confused the number, but it was
What's his name?
Oh shoot. It's Pepe II. Pepe II?
Yes. Usually people say Pepe the Second.
Pepe the Second.
Right. Right. Good answer. We're going to talk about Pepe in a little bit. Pepe is really important. Make sense? There's some chatting going on. What's going on in the chat? Let's see.
The question from Miss Anna Rodriguez was, did they whitewash Princess Nofret? And then there was some discussion about that. If you missed it, that's what the discussion is.
And you're asking that because Princess Nofret, the statue looks interesting to you? What are your observations about the statue? Sinette Anna, why don't you talk to us about what your observations are? Can you unmute? Remember how to do it? Yes, no? Let me share my screen again really quickly. Oh, there you go. There you go.
Yeah, on page 41 in the book.
Yes.
You see her in her skin is white.
Yes. What do you think about her? Do you think that's unusual?
To me, it would be.
Okay. Why do you think she might look like that?
I don't
She
know.
possibly albino.
Again? Was someone trying to help Sinette Anna out? Anna, you want to tag team one of your scholars?
Mm-hmm.
A reason why she may look like that?
Could she have been albino?
I don't think that we know her as being an albino. There's another reason.
Maybe she wasn't native to.
Oh.
Yeah, she was a native.
Yeah, okay.
One of the things that we know is that the father of Rahotep,
Okay.
many deals with foreign rulers. Even Western scholars argue that Princess Nofret is a foreign woman that comes to marry his son. But I'm going to tell you that they don't usually tell you that first. They just show you the image.
Okay.
That's being intellectually dishonest. So I don't believe that she has been whitewashed. I think that's how she looked, or at least that's how she was depicted, right? But she is from another place.
Okay.
Now her statue, their full color statue, is real. Did you see? Did they just show you Nofret, or did they show you both of them together?
Just her.
I wonder why.
Because you could really find out that one is lighter than the other.
Well, because when you don't see them together, let me share my screen again. Then what you're doing is you're making an argument without having to make an argument. You're making an implication. Can you see this here? Look on the right. Here goes Prince Rahotep. Look at Prince Rahotep.
Mm-hmm.
And then look at his wife. They're very different.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In fact, Rahotep look a little bit like that could be Tyree sitting on the throne right there. Look at Tyree. Look at Tyree. That could be Rahotep right there. Are you telling me that don't look? Yeah, you see what I mean? You see, he got a little dude. You know what I mean? That could be Tyree.
Yeah.
It could be Tyree. But understand that his father actually had a lengthy history of exchange and trade with people much further away, particularly in the Levant and beyond. And so when people made trades and made treaties with people, what did they do? One of the ways that you build strong relationships with other people,
marry other
world, is you say, you know what? I have a daughter that's around the age of your son. How about they get married? There's several reasons why that would happen in the ancient world. Why don't one of you scholars give me a reason why you think that might be common?
To maintain peaceful relations.
Why would that maintain peaceful relations?
Family ties.
I'm not going to send the army to kill you if I know my daughter is there, right?
Exactly.
That's part of what happens. And then in addition to that, if my daughter is there, she becomes really acclimated to your culture. She can really, dad could say, yo, we need something. You need to talk to your father-in-law. You need to talk to your husband who's now the king. You need to do these things. And then as almost an emissary, that can happen. You want to hear something even more interesting? Usually in the terms of Kemet, that relationship of sending women to be married to rulers usually went in one direction. So when we go further along and get to the New Kingdom, we're going to talk about an amazing ruler by the name of Amenhotep III. Amenhotep III is so important that he should be a name that everyone knows. And Amenhotep III is at the rules at the time in Kemet when Kemet is an empire. It's powerful, it's far-flung. And this one king from the people called the Hittites says, look, let's create good will amongst our people. I'm going to send some of our most important daughters to you, right? To live amongst you, to become part of the Kemetic Empire. Guess how many women he sends? What would be a large number?
100.
100 would be a lot of people, wouldn't it? You imagine sending 100 women from the Hittite Empire to the Kemetic Empire to live with them, to be essentially become part of their nation. He sends 270.
Wow.
And Amenhotep III writes back, and guess what he says? Thanks. So eventually the king waits for a minute, and guess what he says back? The Hittite king. What does he say? What do you think he would say with regard to the conversation we're having? He says, what? You're not going to send women this way? I sent you 270 of our most beautiful, intelligent, and eligible women to become part of your empire. You're not going to send any women here? Because remember, if we're trying to create mutual reliance, one of the reasons why I'm not going to send an army to your palace for a war is because my ladies are there, my daughters are there, my nieces are there. Well, if you don't send any women to me, you can still send the army and say, let's just kill them all out, right? I'm sorry I killed your uncle, but it had to be done. But what does Amenhotep III say? He sends back a very terse letter. He says, no woman, no princess, no great lady of Kemet will ever be sent from beyond our borders. That's some gangster play right there, y'all. You could send your ladies here. We're friends. But I'm not sending my ladies to you. That's not going to be able to do it, is what he said. And because Amenhotep III was so powerful, he Mutawalis is the king's name. He just had to eat it. He just had to be like, well, I guess that's how it's going to be. So you're in Kemetic history, it is more often that you will see women from outside come into Kemet. People from outside come into Kemet. Then you will see people from Kemet go outside permanently. There's several reasons. One of the reasons is the lineage of people in Kemet went along the line of the woman. It's called a matrilineal society. So if I make a habit of sending women outside of Kemet, I'm going to destroy the matrilineal nature of my society. Women are very important in Kemet. Very prominent. Very prominent. In fact, while we could argue, I mean, let's just think of it this way. When we look at other ancient kingdoms, sometimes we'll find fragments of history that give us the name of kings. Half the time, we don't even know the name of the kings. Think about even in the biblical narrative. We have the story of Noah. Noah is very important, right? In the biblical mythology, he and his family repopulate the entire world. The entire world in the biblical mythology. So who does he take on the boat with him? The book says Noah went with himself, his wife, and his sons. They name his sons and their wives. Are you telling me that out of the womb of these women are essentially going to come the rest of humanity according to your myth, but you didn't even give us their names? Other societies did not view women as important as African societies did.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? That never happened in African societies. From the beginning of history, we hear about queens. We hear about, even when there's a powerful king, the powerful king is only powerful because either he is the offspring of a woman that has the royal lineage, or he married the woman who has the royal lineage. So the concept of divine femininity was very important in ancient Kemet. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk more about that as we go. Any other questions? I want to shift to actually go into a little bit more of lecture mode. Any other questions about what you've read? By the way, let me say this to you, Anna. Isn't it interesting that they just showed you Nofret by herself? Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
You know, these two statues, they go together. You saw how they look.
Mm-hmm.
So they were actually trying to make an argument without making an argument. I think that is intellectually immoral. I think that is unbalanced. As Malcolm would have said, they're trying to hoodwink you. That's what they're doing, and that's not fair. That's not fair. Now, was Nofret an important lady in ancient Kemet? Yes, but most scholars argue she was a foreign lady. So when you just put her image there without saying anything, it tells the story. Okay, let's move. So I'm hoping that you're getting through the text, right? I'm hoping that you're reading Chronicles of Pharaohs. I'm hoping that you're really getting through the African origin of civilization. It will help you understand the lectures that we're going to be doing. Okay? It's of critical importance for you to do your reading. And Jabari may next time ask questions and not just see who amongst you can answer it. I might even just say, I might call on you to answer the question. Enough of you said you wanted to fly for me to do that, right? Now listen, am I trying to beat you up or shame you if you can't answer the question? No. But what I am trying to do is force you to try to master the information. You're not here to sit here and to be regaled about my understanding of the history. You're here so that you can understand the history. So if I'm not doing that, I'm not doing my job. There was someone sitting in my seat, and Jabari was in the classroom years ago. And I'm going to tell you that those scholars, they pushed me. I'll never forget, I might have mentioned James Turner, Dr. James Turner at Cornell, who more than any other scholar helped mold Jabari into the scholar that he is, more than anyone else. Dr. Turner is still alive. You've heard me mention Dr. Men and Dr. Clark. They were important to me as well. But Dr. Turner had spent more time molding me. I took 9 of his classes. I would sit and talk with him. And you know what the funny thing is? I was terrified of him. In fact, even as a nearly 50-year-old man, I'm still a little scared of him. I revere him that way, right? When he tells me something, I get all worried and shook. Do you know what Dr. Turner most recently told me that was a challenge? Here's Jabari's book, 7 Little White Lies, The Conspiracy to Destroy the Black Self-Image. I asked Dr. Turner, you'll see that he wrote a blurb on the back, right? I asked Dr. Turner to write a blurb for my book. He read the book, and guess what he said to me? This is excellent. Change the name. He didn't say, you should consider changing the name. He said, change the name. Do you know that night I could not sleep? Couldn't sleep. Dr. Turner told me to change the name of my book. The next day I had to call him and go at it with him as to why this name was appropriate. At the end of the conversation, by the way, Dr. Turner always does this. while he's listening to you. You have no idea whether he agrees, disagrees, whether he's going to tear you to pieces intellectually. At the end, he said, "You have my blessing, go forward." You have no idea what that meant to hear that from him. Well, when I was a young student, I remember that I don't even know if I told you this story. He had so much reading in his classes that you would have to literally, in some ways, forsake your other classes to do well in his class. And that's what I did. There were about 50 students in one of his classes. I studied that literature so seriously. Thankfully, when I got to the midterm, Dr. Turner graded on the curve. So I had the highest score in the entire class. There were 100 questions on his exam. Guess how many of them I had gotten right with the highest score? I got 30 questions correct. I whiffed. I failed on 70 of the questions. Now, all of my friends who had been studying and stressed out and everything for this exam, by the way, one of my friends, who I'm still good friends with, got an 8. I still tease him about that almost 30 years later. He got 8 right. Anyway, they were like, "Yo, you got a 30. That's the highest grade in the class. You got an A." I spent so much time on his work that I wasn't satisfied. Guess what I did? I went back through the exam and looked at the text and said, these questions aren't in the text. That's why I got a 30. So here I am marching into his office and telling him, "Dr. Turner, this is unacceptable." By the way, Dr. Turner did what he normally does. He reached back in his chair and he said, I said, "These questions are not in the text." I gave him some numbers. Here goes question 69. That question is not in here. How about question 17? That question's not in here. After listening to me go on a rant for about 5 minutes, guess what Dr. Turner said? He said, "Did you read the footnotes?" I said, the footnotes? He said, "Yes, did you read the footnotes?" I said, I don't think so. He said, "Well, dear brother, when I gave you pages, I don't know, 8 to 67, did I say only read the pages above the footnotes, or did I tell you to read everything?" He said, "Dear scholar, the footnotes are how scholars give you a sense of how they've arrived at their arguments. If you are a scholar, you must read the footnotes. Are you a scholar?" Beads of sweat running down my head. My mouth is dry. So what am I saying? Dr. Turner made me intellectually who I am today. That's what he did. And so when I push you, please understand it's because I want to make sure that you get this story. I want to make sure that you are mastering the information. I'm not going to pull a Dr. Turner on you. I'm not, right? But I am going to make sure that you're doing your reading. If you say you want to fly, a lot of you said you want to fly, I'm going to push you lovingly because I want you to get it. Okay? Okay. One more question, then we're going to start. I'd like for you to give me the name. What should I give you? You read to page 67, correct? Please give me.
Yes.
Give me one of the names of the son of the builder of the Great Merkut, the Great Pyramid. One of the names of his sons. He has more than one son. Give me one of the names of his sons.
Of Sneferu?
Ooh, people jumping in now. Who was that? I heard 2 voices. I think I saw. Was that MTC?
Yes.
What name did you say?
Mancuri, if I'm pronouncing that correct.
Mancuri. Okay. I'm going to help you with the translation, with the pronunciation, but that is a correct answer. And I think I also saw Sinette Charity answer as well.
I was wondering if you were talking about Sneferu's sons.
Am I talking about Sneferu's sons? When I say the builder of the Great Pyramid, who am I referring to?
Khufu.
The pharaoh.
Khufu is usually who I'm referring to. Now, is there a relationship between Seneferu and Khufu? Don't make me have to call on y'all.
Yes.
What's the relationship? Was they homies? What? Come on now. What was the relationship? Oh goodness.
Wasn't Khufu Neferu's son?
Okay, thank you. You were about to have me leave the room and come back for the answer. Come on now. You all should be able to answer that. Dwa Senet Charity. Khufu was Seneferu's son. Okay? And I think I also see Lamar saying Khafre is another answer. Good answer. So when I talk about the builder of the Great Pyramid, by the way, I'm going to steal that word pyramid from you in a minute. When I talk about the builder of the Great Pyramid, I'm referring to Khufu, the son of Seneferu. And Khufu had at least, he had several sons, right? He had, his eldest son was Jedefra. That's one name that most people don't know. By the way, sometimes folks render his name Ra-Dejef. Same name, they just are using the glyphs differently. His second eldest son was Khafre, right? Khufu, Khafra. Yes, Khufu, Khafra, and then the son of Khafra is Menkaura. So that's the name you're looking for, Menkaura. Okay. Sometimes people say Menkaure. Make sense? So he is the son of the son. Does that make sense? Yes? Everyone with me?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Good. We're going to talk about these incredible brothers tonight. We're going to talk about their legacy. We're going to talk about what they did tonight. Okay. So let's shift. Let's go. Let's talk a bit more. Let's continue our journey.
One question.
Please go ahead.
Senufru is also Menetho?
No, not his name is Seneferu.
Okay, Seneferu. Okay.
Right. Menetho is they live thousands of years apart, actually. Menetho is actually the name of a priest historian much later. He lived during the time that the Greeks are in control. And he writes a history of Kemet. So it's one of the earliest written histories of Kemet. What comes from Menetho, who was likely a native Kemetic person trying to help the Greeks understand Kemetic history because they're there. Okay? Make sense? Yes?
It says Senefru. His birth name was Senefru. He's of beauty, also known as Seneferu, Sonoferu, Saurus, and in parentheses it has Menetho.
No. The parentheses are saying that's the name that Menetho uses. That's why they have that in parentheses. Does that make sense? They're saying Menetho was the one that used this rendition of the name.
Okay.
And the reason why they have also known as is because several later people begin to translate, and they have different versions of names. And sometimes the versions are different. Like I just said to you, the eldest son of Khufu, his name is usually, most people call him Jedefra today. Jedefra, which means something like he is the endurance of Ra. That's kind of what his name is. I am the endurance of Ra is what Jedefra means. But sometimes people translate his name Ra-Dejef because they're looking at the glyphs and they put them in different order. Same person, but his name is translated differently. At least they're using the same language and their different translations. Then when we see the Greeks come, the Greeks don't read for the most part, the Greeks don't read the Kemetic language at all. So what they end up doing is they just change all the names, which I think is absolutely a travesty. It is inappropriate, incorrect, and we have to undo that. So you're going to hear a number of names. For example, when we say Khufu, the Greeks called him Cheops. Cheops.
Mm-hmm.
And so understand that we are going to need to go through back to the name that is closest to the name of the ancestor that we are speaking about. African people argue that in order for their ancestors to continue to live, their names must be spoken. If you are not speaking their name, perhaps that's why you still catching hell in 2020, because the ancestors cannot intervene. We must speak their names.
I have a question.
Yes, Annette Lisa.
So how did they know, if they didn't use the Kemetic original name, how did they know what their name was to translate it into Greek?
Really good question. Sometimes what they do is they are listening to the native people who, and when I say the native people, I'm talking about particularly the priests, people who were learned and could read. And because they couldn't read, all they're doing is listening to name and speaking a name.
Okay.
And so in doing that, what happens is they kind of mash it up eventually.
Okay.
If they can't read it, they don't know the language well enough to be able to really render it properly. Just like the term Egypt is come from a Greek derivation of one of the names of Kemet's greatest cities. Egypt is not an Egyptian word. That's the reason why I am going to use the word Kemet.
Okay.
Because the Greeks, not understanding the language, they just renamed everything.
Oh, okay.
And sometimes
City.
they renamed it just because they didn't know the language. Other times, I think they just didn't understand, so they made some stuff up.
What was the name of the city?
The name of the city was Het Ka Patah. Het Ka Patah.
How did that turn into Egypt?
You know what? That is one of the strangest questions that everyone is trying to understand to that charity. I think you say it for a while as it translates later into Egypt. We're talking about literally hundreds of years where not understanding what you heard makes you say something different. So Kapata is very different than Egypt, right? Very different. That's the reason why we have to go back to those original names. And now, I'm not saying forget the Greek names, because unfortunately, still in 2020, in order for you to do your research, you're going to often have to look for the Greek names. Some of the names that Jabari is going to share with you in this class, if you Google those names, you're going to see a picture of Jabari smiling. And you're going to say, what? Jabari just made that up. No. Unfortunately, it's because Western scholars are still using the Greek names. I have challenged so many of them on it, you don't even know. Because I'm the guy that studies at a higher level and is in the museums. And so I'm there when they're making sometimes the descriptions of what they're seeing. And I challenge them. Why are you still writing Osiris? Why are you writing Osiris?
Have you thought of publishing a compendium of just like all of the original names so that people can look at us? You have done it?
I have. Trust me, I have 14 books on the slate that are coming out. It's a lot of work. So, and I've only completed one. I'm working on 2 simultaneously.
I mean, I think it'd be good to even have it just like as an online reference, you know, for scholars like us who are trying to do the research.
I agree. We may have something similar coming forward soon. And that won't come from my pen, it will come from my wife's pen, because she was trying to compile that information for the people that were taking our tours in Kemet.
Mm-hmm.
It's helpful to be able to look at both of those things. The challenge is how you gotta there's so much to do, right? And so when you have so much to do, sometimes my priest in the shrine, or even my students who are taking my classes say, Jabari, you should do this. And sometimes I smile because you know how much other stuff I'm doing.
I mean, would you like help with that? I would like to help with that.
Of course I would. Okay. Now, I say to you that after this class, you'll maybe even be able to help more, because I'm not just trying to give you a rendition of the name that is more accurate. I also want to give you the name in the glyphs.
Yes, absolutely.
So I need someone that knows the history, reads the Kemetic language. It's much more expansive. Because the reality is, even when I give you a name in English, that name in English may not be completely and entirely accurate, because the Kemetic language does not transcribe all of its vowel sounds. You've heard me say this.
Mm-hmm.
So that sometimes those names might be a little different. We need to give you the glyphs as well. Okay, so let's shift. By the way, good question. Very good question. I believe that we ended here, correct? Can you see that? I believe this is where we ended. And we were beginning to talk about the master pyramid builders. By the way, this is another example of when I'm going to steal that word from you in a few moments. Because when I say the word pyramid, it's almost like hearing chalk on nails on the chalkboard. I don't use the word pyramid. I only use it as an intermediate before we start saying some other stuff. I'll tell you why in a few moments. So you are looking at one of the few statues of an amazing multi-genius named Imhotep. Please say his name with me. Imhotep.
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 Imhotep. Possibly one of the most important human beings ever to draw breath. He is likely one of the most important Africans ever to walk on 2 feet. He is a multi-genius. He is an architect. He is an engineer. He is the equivalent of a prime minister. He's a poet. He's a doctor. He is so critically important to the development of not just African history, but human history, yet his understanding of who he is has been thoroughly misrepresented. And this is, I would argue, one of the greatest travesties that we are still living through in the modern era. The fact that most people don't know who this man is. And we're going to talk much more about him tonight. You're going to get to know him intimately as we attempt to reclaim his name. So, Imhotep is the architect of a powerful king, a king by the name of Djoser. And he decides that he's going to do something interesting for his king. He is going to attempt to build a monument that is radically different than the burials that existed before him. I can't explain to you how important this is, because his attempt to do something different is what allows us to live in the types of buildings that we live in today. That is how important he is. So important that his contributions are important contributions for all of history. Let's see. I want to show you one other thing. Let's give me a second here. Now, most people know Imhotep, unfortunately, not as an important African, but they know him as something very different. How many of you are familiar with Imhotep and are familiar with his contributions?
I am.
I am.
Wonderful.
I am.
Taken to the choir. But for most people, when they hear the word Imhotep, this is what they probably see.
And they're probably thinking the scarabs eat flesh.
Yes, they do.
To remain sealed inside his sarcophagus, the undead for all of eternity. The Magi would never allow him to be released, for he would arise a walking disease, a plague upon mankind, an unholy flesh eater with the strength of ages, power over the sands, and the glory of invincibility.
Can I say to you that this kind of depiction offends me? Because in actuality, what happened is the names of some of our greatest African ancestors have been maligned and continue to be maligned. So many people know Imhotep only through the Mummy series. And in the Mummy series, he was a villain, depicted by Arabic people, by the way, not by what most people would consider native Africans. And so I want you to think about what this means for our understanding of the accomplishments of Africans. More people watched the Mummy movie over the course of one summer than have taken a history of Kemet course, a Black history course, in fact, history courses in 10 years. In 10 years. And so understand that these malicious depictions are damaging. They prevent us from actually feeling like we should reach out to those ancients and understand their story. We think that something is evil or scary or spooky. And that is the work of, a lot of that work is the work of Hollywood, right? And it's the work of people who don't understand and don't have any interest in understanding. And so it's a major problem. We are going to reclaim the name of this African, this great African tonight. Before we speak more of him, I want us to talk about what he did that is so important. I want you to understand that before Imhotep, oh goodness, this is supposed to disappear. Why didn't it disappear? Give me a sec here. Every now and then, my presentation doesn't work the way that it should. Let me do this. So before Imhotep builds his masterful design, the way that the Kemetic people buried their dead was in what was generally called sand pit burials. And so what this would essentially be is they would dig a hole in the sand, just like people dig a hole in dirt, and they would bury their dead there, right? Make sense? Now the sand does something very interesting. It's a natural desiccant. What is a desiccant?
It dries out the body?
Yes, yes. Just like when you buy a package, you see those little white bags that say do not eat. That's a desiccant. It removes moisture. Well, sand does something similar. So when you buried your deceased loved one in the sand, it will remove all of the moisture from their skin, from their bodies. This was probably the first sahuification, the first mummification process. it was something that occurred more organically in its earliest stages. But there's a bit of a problem with a sand burial. Can you see in this particular depiction that comes from the Nubian Museum, by the way, you're seeing that this person is buried and they have some items that were buried along with them for them to successfully make the journey to the afterlife? I think that we can make the argument that African people always believed in an afterlife, right? Anyway.
Yes.
So this person was buried in this sand, and their family would mourn and they would go back home. Guess what would happen after some time?
The sand would be blown away.
The sand blows away, right? It doesn't stay there like that. The sand blows away. And so here you are chilling in the village and you see an animal walking with grandpa's femur.
Oh, God.
Wouldn't you be terrified by that?
Oh,
no, we got to do better than this. We can't. We spent all of this time burying our loved one, and then the sand just blew away, and now his body is left out into the open.
Mm-hmm.
So you should know that sand pit burials were not how people were going to continue to bury their deceased loved ones. So what they ended up doing after that is what is called rock pit burials. And in actuality, the image on the screen is now more of a rock pit burial than a sand pit burial. Can you see the stones around the edges?
Mm-hmm.
So they would still dig a stone, dig a hole in the sand, but they would cover the interior with rock, and they would cover the top with rock. Rock is much more difficult to blow away. And so this is a better form of burial, right? It's an advancement. It's an evolution in burial. But you should know that that doesn't even work entirely either, because what could easily happen with a rock pit burial? Anybody have an idea?
The rocks could fall.
Yeah, but that didn't happen that often. You put heavy rocks. But guess what could happen?
The sand can still blow away.
Yeah, but the rocks are still there. This is what happens. Guess what happens? You went and
remove the rocks.
Say again?
I said someone would remove
Someone could remove the rocks easily. So, okay, so the sand didn't move a 30-pound rock. But if I know that Jabari's father, I didn't even mean to say Jabari's father because my father actually just passed away. But I know that Jabari's family has lots of money, is wealthy, and they buried his father with all of the things that speak to his wealth on his journey into the afterlife, right? When we go back to the village, someone might say, look, man, I'm alive now. I need that stuff. And they can remove the rocks. It's very easy for that to happen. And so the rock pit burial would not be the final form. That even needed more innovation. And so then we have this form. So what happened next is that people would actually dig a much deeper hole through the sand into the bedrock. Sometimes these shafts are even vertical, like the one that you're seeing here. So they're not just through the sand, they're into the bedrock. And then we put the burial there. And on top of that, we usually build this structure out of mud bricks. You know what a mud brick is, right? Right? And who thinks they know?
Sand and water.
Say again, Santisi, say again, what's a mud brick?
Sand, water, and sticks.
Yeah, not just sand though. It's more, it's mud. It's from the river, right? It's dirt, maybe with a little sand, maybe with some sticks and some grass. You mix it with water, you make a brick, and then what do you do with it?
Bake it in the sun.
You bake it in the sun, right? Do you think it becomes very hard?
Yes.
Very, very hard. And extremely durable. Extremely durable. So they would make a mud brick structure like the one you're seeing here. See how it tapers towards the top? See how the bottom is wider than the top? Can you see that?
Yes.
So this is what the Arabs, the later Muslim folks, called the mastaba. They called it mastaba. Mastaba means bench, because in many of their colonial homes, they had a bench outside of their homes that had a similar shape. So they called these mastabas. Today, you'll usually hear the word mastaba. That is not a Kemetic term. You want to know what we call these structures? We call them the perjet. Perjet. You could spell perjet if you'd like. You could spell it P-E-R, second word, D-J-E-T. Perjet. Can I say to you that in all of the decades that I have studied, it was very difficult for me to find the name of the original name of the mastaba. It's very difficult. It took me a long time to find it because modern scholars simply call them mastabas. And I wanted to know, what did the Kemetic people name them? I'm sure they didn't call them benches. These are the burials for their loved ones. They must have had a more powerful name. I was in fact correct. Guess what perjet means? Jet is the word for eternity. And per is the word for like house. So it means house of eternity. I see Lamar Forte. Uh-oh, somebody doing some work, boy. I'm telling you. How you know that? Doing some work. The perjet. I see Anna put that in there too, right? Good. So they actually were calling these the house of eternity. Doesn't that speak to what you thought was happening to your ancestors after they made their transition? That in fact, they did not die. The end of their physical form didn't mean the end of your ancestor, of your loved one. They were eternal. So they called those buildings the perjet. Now, this amazing master, this amazing polymath, this amazing multi-genius African, Imhotep, decides that he's going to do something even more amazing for his king. Instead of preparing to build him a regular perjet, a regular mastaba, he decides that he's not going to use mud brick. He decides that what he's going to do is he is going to prepare to build the perjet out of rock, out of stone. And so he builds a really large perjet out of stone. You should understand that this is considered by historians to be the world's first building in stone. So he builds this wonderful structure out of stone. And guess what? His king Djoser was still alive and kicking. So then what did he do? He said, I'm going to go further. He puts another perjet on top of that one out of stone. And then another. And then another, and to the point where he actually has put 6 on top. It's believed that he started with 4. Can you see this image here? It's believed he started with 4, and he expands it to where it has 6 levels. All in stone. You should understand that this building is, in the ancient world, a skyscraper. The world's first building in stone, and an absolute marvel of architectural and engineering work. And this building is usually called, so these are the stacked stone mastabas or stacked stone perjet. This building is today usually called the Step Pyramid, designed and built by Imhotep for the king Djoser. Now, you know, he did not call it a pyramid. In fact, any of those ancient Africans who built these structures did not use the word pyramid. It had a name. Its name was Kebu Neteru. Please say that word with me. Kebu.
Kebu.
Neteru.
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 Any clue what that means? What's the Neteru?
Divine principles and forces.
Divine principles, the divine personalities, right? It's not well translated as gods, but in the English mindset, in our modern mindset, sometimes that's the only word that people can understand. These are the divine principles, the divine personalities. Kebu means libations. Libations. So this building was called U is the way that we are depicting the plural sound. So this is the libations to the divine personalities. What a powerful name. What a powerful name. Kebu Neteru. And so that is what Imhotep does. This is what leads to the amazing structure that we will later call the pyramid. Now I want to say something quickly.
Oh,
yes, please
sorry.
go ahead. Question.
Yes, so I wanted to ask a general question about the Merkuts.
Yes.
And just as a reference, because I just started reading the book Black Genesis.
Yes.
And considering there's a lot of scientists and different scholars who are questioning the, I guess, agreed upon, quote unquote, Egyptological dating of the Merkuts. What are your thoughts on some of that new information that's coming out?
I think that for the most part, there are those who are questioning the age of some structures. They usually question not the name, the age. They tend to question the age of that structure that has been misnomered the Sphinx. We're going to talk about that structure in a little bit as well. That's usually what they're questioning. Most people don't question the age of the Merkuti, of the pyramids. And so I think that many of those dates are likely correct, because we have other information about what was built. And even in periods a bit later, they also have texts that describe what was built for who. Some of them also have the names inside of them. We'll talk about that as well as we move. So that some of them are, the dates are pretty decent. Okay, but definitely when we talk about the Haramakot statue, there is some controversy around dating. We're going to talk about that in a little bit too.
Okay, Dua.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So
I have a question as well.
Yes, go ahead. Was that Sentiri?
No, that was. I do have a question, but that was TC Media 20.
Oh, okay. So I heard send TC first. We'll go to send TC, then to send Tyree. Yes, send TC.
It's also about the miracle. Most of the documentaries and books that I've read reference that the people that built them were slaves. Is that true, or were they actually just citizens, indentured servants? What's the truth behind that in total?
Right. I have actually studied this topic extensively. It makes up an entire chapter of my book. Let me say to you that we know definitively that the people who built these amazing structures were, first, not enslaved. Second of all, they were native people. Third of all, they were skilled workers. And we know a lot about many of the people who built some of these structures. For some of them, we know where they lived. We know what they ate. We know how much they got paid. We know what teams they worked in. We know that one team was to move blocks. Another team was to cut blocks. We know a lot about them. So we definitely know that they were not enslaved people. We definitely know that they were native people that were building these amazing structures. We'll talk more about that a bit later as well. Like this is an onion, right? So we're going to go layer by layer through this important story. There's something else that is important here as well. By the way, did that answer your question, Sen TC, or was there more you want to ask?
Yes, sir. Do I?
Good, good, wonderful, wonderful. And I think Sentiri, you had a question or a comment as well.
Yeah, yes, sir. And forgive me in advance, it may not be a very intelligent question, but I've always wondered. It seems, and based on what we just learned here, that the Merkuti is in effect a tomb, and it seems like to be it seems to me, and maybe this just from from my perspective and my modern perspective, that's a lot of resources and a lot of effort for this huge structure to be devoted to one individual. Can you help me put that into context, please?
Yes, that's an excellent question. It's an excellent question. Let me say this to you. When Jabari was younger, I actually had a job where I was running a youth program in the building that is known as the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City, right? It's the West, I think it's the largest Gothic cathedral in the United States. Really big building, beautiful building, right? I remember our offices were in the basement, and I actually was helping them move some boxes one day, and I had not been in this back area, and somebody should have said to Jabari, be careful. Guess what happened as I was moving this box? You know when you're moving your box, you can't see your feet? I tripped on something, and I ate it. I hit the ground, bam, hard, ripped my pants, everything. And when I got up, or when I turned over, they said, you didn't see that? I said, I had a box in my hand. How was I going to see that? And as I turned over, I noticed it was an outcropping of stone just in the middle of the floor. And as I noticed it, I started to look around and noticed there were a bunch of them. I said, what is that? They said, oh, this is the crypt. Wait, I just tripped over somebody's grave? They said, yes. They actually had buried some of the priests and the individuals in the basement of the cathedral. And our offices were in the same area. So we didn't have our offices in that area. Obviously, it was the crypt area. But we had boxes stored there. Would it be correct for me to call that entire cathedral that actually housed several different nonprofit programs, and in fact, a working church with probably about 30 clergy and many other people, would it be correct for me to call that a tomb? Some people might say yes. I would say it's much more than that. And I think
did they actually find bodies in those?
Yes. Oh, where in the Merkuti, you mean?
Yes.
That's a whole other question. We're going to come to that in a second. We're coming to that in a second. Really good question. These are good questions, folks. Good questions. I'm building it step by step so you get where we're going here, right? So understand that the Merkuti likely played many different roles in the life of ancient Kemet. It is believed that they were burials. Now, why do I say it's believed that they were burials? We find the coffins. The coffins, or the Neb Ankhs, are there. The Neb Ankh is there. So we can say that we can definitively say that someone was meant to be buried there. But this gets to a very important question. You heard the question that was just asked, right? That we've never found a body in it. There has not been one body found in one Merkut.
Right.
And you know, there are over 118 in Kemet that have been discovered. There are likely many more. But over 118 have now been listed in Kemet. By the way, there are 200 in Nubia. That's a whole other conversation. But understand that in 118, we haven't found one body. There could be lots of reasons why the bodies aren't there. First of all, when people pilfer and steal and defile, they often would steal the bodies, right? Part of the reason why they'd steal the bodies is because as your body was sahufied or wrapped in your fine cloth, there would be precious amulets placed in your body or in the cloth. And so if we're placing precious amulets in there, people actually want to steal the body so they can get that stuff out of there. Tons of gold and stones. And so some of them were pilfered, right? We might also believe that one of the reasons why the bodies weren't there is perhaps the Mirkut was nothing more than a ceremonial burial. Maybe they did a ceremony there and then they moved the body someplace else. That's not a strong argument because we haven't found those bodies someplace else. And here's another argument. Maybe they actually became divine and disappeared. We've never found a body. But I will say to you that those structures were definitely considered partially the burial of a king or a queen, partially, and their royal family, partially. But it was much more than that. Today, when we look at a Mirkut, we just see the structure, right? You should understand that you should see the Mirkut as a works project. Remember, Kemet was a land that had a great flood, right? During the time that the land was flooded, you couldn't work the land, right? So what would you do? Just be out of work? What would you do? Well, maybe the royal family would say, well, during this time, you can come work on these structures. I'm saying maybe, we actually know that that happened, right? We know that some people work there seasonally. We also should know that those structures, because you just see the one building, you don't see the entire complex around it. It was also a place where an entire, possibly hundreds or thousands of people occupied that space because there were temples all around them. You would have hundreds in large ones. There might have been hundreds of priests working and living there. So this structure is much more than a tomb. It is also a good argument. We now believe that the Great Mirkut took over 20 years to build. And it is believed that halfway through, guess what they did? They stopped. Why? Because they were taking measurements of the heavens. So it's also an astronomical tool.
Also, can you talk a little bit about the water canals? Have you studied some of the theories about the electrical current that may have been circulating underneath the structure?
There are some people who believe that they are used as power plants, that there was salt water that would come into that area, and that they would be able to use salt water to essentially create a gigantic battery. I'm not really, I'm not convinced by that argument yet. I'm not convinced yet. That doesn't mean I won't be convinced later. I'm not convinced by that argument yet. But there are some people who believe that they were an ancient power plant. That term has been used by some authors. I think they need to tidy up their work before I believe them, because there are tons of holes in that argument. Yeah, I think there are tons of holes in that argument. By the way, I have argued that with some of the people that wrote that, by the way, or made that we've argued, right? And they admit that there's some holes. And guess what they say to me? Of course there are holes in this argument. It's new. You have to help us with the argument.
Brother Jabari, are there hollow spaces in the Mirkut? Is it all solid except for the tomb?
Understand that because there are 118, there are definitely some passages and some rooms, but they are mostly solid. They're mostly solid. They are mostly, in some of the Mirkuti, the rooms are actually subterranean. And that what you're seeing is just stone on the top. But they are mostly, even though there are some rooms there, they are mostly solid. And we're talking about millions of tons of stone. Amazing. We're going to talk more about the Great Mirkut as we try to wrap our minds around what they are. Now, there's one other thing I want to say about the Mirkuti and about the burials that we've just talked about. Obviously, you can see their intermediate stages, right? We're going to even show you even more intermediate stages in a moment. They're clearly intermediate stages. You see the sand pit burial, you see the rock pit burial, you see the Purjet, which they are now calling the Mastaba, right? Which we should continue to call the Purjet. And now you're seeing the step Mirkut. We haven't even gotten to the true flat-sided Mirkut yet. We're going there in a moment. But you can see the intermediate stages. Guess what that can tell us about the Mirkuti and about these structures? There are two things that you will hear people say that this disproves. One, foreign people built it. If someone from another place knew how to build this, they wouldn't be practicing and developing the technology here in the place that it exists. They used to argue that, in fact, the person that's considered the father of American Egyptology used to say that the Mirkuti were built by a great race of master Aryans. That's literally the phrase he used. Literally the phrase he used. There is no argument for that. Those are nothing more than his racist flights of fancy. When you see the intermediate steps, that means that the people there built it. There's a second thing that it tells you. The next time someone says, you know, the aliens did this, tell them, excuse me, and then slap them and say, come into your right mind. Once again, people from outside didn't build these. When we actually fall on those arguments, we are not giving credit to the Africans and their science, ingenuity, and understanding of architecture and engineering. These were made by native Africans, and the intermediate stages proves this. Let's keep moving. I want to say a little bit more about Imhotep before we shift back. You're seeing here a bronze statue. Wait, oh, you're not seeing my screen yet. Let me share again. Sorry. There you go. You should be able to see it now. Can you see my screen now? A few more words about Imhotep. Imhotep is an amazing, amazing ancestor. He is perhaps the world's first multi-genius. I told you that he served as, the term that you'll usually hear is chief vizier. Vizier is actually, it comes from the French. We called his title the Jati. It's like a prime minister. It's like second in command for the entire nation. Very high-ranking person. So he served as a chief administrator for the nation, an architect, an engineer, and even a high priest. He designs the step Mirkut, known as Kebu Neteru, as the world's first building in stone. That means that if you live in a building that is made of brick, that is made of limestone, that is made of any masonry, before you enter your door, you should knock on its side and give homage to your great African ancestor, Imhotep. Without his attempt to stretch the boundaries of what we knew at the time into excellence, what would we be living in today? He deserves credit for this innovation. He was also a well-renowned poet. He becomes the patron saint of scribes. In fact, when scribes were about to do important writing, they would take a little bit of ink and pour it onto the ground for Imhotep. Consider it an ink libation. That's how influential he is, literally for thousands of years. It is believed that he wrote several different maxims, including eat, drink, and be merry. Tomorrow we shall die. Which, by the way, sounds a little bit like a hip hop line to me. You know what I mean? He's like, you know, we got to enjoy it now because, you know, you don't know when it's going to end, y'all. Party today. Sounds a little bit like an ancient Kemetic hip hop line, right? He also should be known as one of the world's first doctors. Today, when doctors speak, when they're given their white coats, often they recite the Hippocratic Oath. We mentioned this, I believe, in our first class. They should be speaking the name of Imhotep. I guarantee you that if Hippocrates knew that doctors were citing him, he would say, why me? Because Hippocrates was one who studied the work of many ancient doctors in order to actually develop his field. He would be stunned if you said that. We should be speaking the name of Imhotep. He even is credited with writing a journal, a treatise, a document that today is called the Edwin Smith Papyrus. The Edwin Smith Papyrus. By the way, Edwin Smith is just the Western guy that bought it. He couldn't read it. He just bought it. It should not be named after him. It's unfortunate that it's named after him. But I have to give you the name because if you're going to do research, that's what you're going to have to research. You're going to have to look for the Edwin Smith Papyrus. Understand that this papyrus has perhaps treatments for 200 ailments. It has many other things written on it that are used, that can be used. In fact, Anika and I are planning to try to bring one back into existence. If one of the things that the papyrus says it has is a remedy that will change an old man into a young man. Can you imagine? By the way, when you read it, what does it sound like it's for? It sounds like it's for an excellent skin cream. Excellent skin cream. Why no one yet has actually used that recipe for what it was meant is it is mind-boggling to me. But understand that all of these things are in the text that is often attributed to Imhotep as the writer. In addition to this, it is clear that he was performing basic surgery, in fact, more than basic surgery. He talks about how what happens when someone injures their head. He even says if someone injures the right side of their head, they may have weakness on the left side. And if they injure the left side, they may have weakness in the right side. Now, you know that today, but he was writing this 5,000 years ago. And guess what else he describes? He describes the tiny river that goes to and fro. He says when someone is ill, you should monitor the tiny river that goes to and fro. What is he referring to?
Your pulse.
The pulse. Excellent answer. This is the world's first description of the pulse. Is the pulse not absolutely essential to understanding someone's health? Today, when you go to the doctor, they take your blood pressure. Today, when they want to know how urgent your treatment may be, they check your pulse. The world's first recorded description of the pulse comes from an ancient African doctor.
I'm curious, when did the first description of the double helix come up?
I don't know if I have a clear answer for you. There may be things that seem to be references to it, and there may be others. I don't really know. We'd have to do a lot more research. There are things that look like they may be a helix. They may be a description of how DNA works, but we have to do a lot more research to try to prove that definitively. I should say that to you. And perhaps scholars will continue to do that work. Maybe this is something that you will do as you continue your continue to uncover this ancient information. I'm going to tell you another thing that it describes. It also describes, as he calls it, a tiny snake that afflicts people in their eyes when they go swimming. By the way, he is describing a condition today that is called water blindness. that sometimes happens when people go swimming in water that is not exactly clean. It is caused by the Bilharzia entity. Bilharzia. You should know that the Bilharzia worm is microscopic. Now let that term sink in for a second and just explode your mind. Imhotep is describing things that are microscopic. We have not found ancient microscopes yet. We have no idea how he knew. He calls it a tiny snake, and the entity looks like a tiny worm. How did he know that? We do not know. But we do know that the text that he wrote is absolutely far beyond its time. By the way, anyone know where it is now? Where is that papyrus now? I know someone's going to say the Cairo Museum, maybe. Someone else is saying the Metropolitan Museum, right? Guess where it is? It is at the Brooklyn Children's Museum. Yes, I see the looks on your face. Why the hell is the world's first medical treatise at the Brooklyn Children's Museum? There is no good reason. I do not know why it's there. How did I find out it was there? Well, Jabari was running an after-school program. This is many years ago. And in fact, I was in charge of the people that were running the programs. One of my folks was out sick. I was there with the kids at the Brooklyn Museum. And as the kids are there playing around in the Children's Museum, I noticed that people are walking with something that is clearly a papyrus, carrying white gloves, and they're walking very slowly with it. I went over there and was asking, what is this? Why is it here? I knew it was a papyrus. By the way, you should know those kids, somebody fell and busted his head open. Somebody ran into him. I was not doing my job, but I was absolutely captivated by the fact that this papyrus was here. This wasn't even a museum that has a lot of ancient Kemetic artifacts. But yes, it is at the Brooklyn Children's Museum. That is ridiculous to me, but that's where it is. You should also know that the text that he writes is written in a format. Some of it is written in a format that we see medical journals written in today. So he describes a problem. Then he says, this is what we're going to try to use as a remedy. We're going to take a group of people and tell them they got the remedy, and another group of people that actually get the remedy, and we're going to measure them. This is the same format that is used in medical journals today. And we see it come forward in an ancient African text. You know, I'm going to tell you most doctors, most dentists, most eye doctors, other than the one that's in this class, we have an amazing, amazing doctor of the eye that is here, that is part of this class. Obviously, he has been studying ancient Africa for a long time, but most of his peers don't know this story. Did you notice that he put something in the Facebook group about it? I'm calling him out. Look at that. He's modest, so he's not going to want me to call him out. Just know that ancient Africans contributed much to the field of medicine, to the field of architecture, and to the scientific fields. Let's shift from Imhotep. Are you ready? So after Djoser makes his transition, we see a number of other rulers come forward. I want to skip a ruler or two and come to a very important ruler next. We are talking about that great ruler known as Seneferu. And this is because we are talking about the great master Merkuti builders. By the way, I said to you that I was going to steal away the word pyramid, right? Let me just say the reason why I really detest using the word pyramid is because when the Greeks came to Kemet and they saw these amazing structures, they may have actually argued that these structures look like these little rice cakes that they made, these conical rice cakes they made and put on the fire. Those were called permis. And so it's believed, one of the reasons why they believe the Greeks called these pyramids is because of their little rice cake. If you continue to call one of the world's greatest architectural and engineering feats made by African hands and African ingenuity by the name of a tiny little Greek rice cake, You are beyond assistance. It's time for the refund for your class. We can't help you. You are beyond assistance. By the way, it's also believed that they may have called it the pyramid because it means something like house of fire, maybe to them. Either way, you should know that that is not what we called it. We either called it the Mer, which in English you can spell either M-R or M-E-R, or I like the word Merkut. And so you're going to hear me use the word Merkut or Merkuti in plural. Merkutu in many, right? Let's move. So you're looking at Seneferu. He is a ruler that rules from somewhere around 2613 to 2498 BCE. BCE. That means almost 5,000 years ago, right? Right? You with me? 4,600 years ago. He is a very important ruler. It is believed that he either builds or completes a Merkut for his father or father-in-law. That ruler's name was Huni. Say Huni with me. Huni was a very important ruler. In fact, there's a magnificent head for Huni in the Brooklyn Museum today. Take a look at this building. Today, they usually call it the Bent Pyramid. I call it the Bent Merkut. Either Seneferu builds it or completes its building. And you'll notice that it has a strange shape, right? It goes up at a 45-degree angle, then it shifts to a 43-degree angle. Can you see that? 54-degree angle to a 43-degree angle. Just misspoke. And in addition to that, can you see that it's crumbling a little bit? It is believed that Seneferu, trying to build this magnificent building, or much, much bigger than the Step Merkut, built it on top of sand. What do we know about sand again? What does sand do?
It blows away.
It blows also. It shifts.
Shifts, yeah.
So if you build it on a foundation that is not stable, the building is not going to be very stable. So it's believed that this was not his final building. It was in some ways, while beautiful, an error. An error. Next, he says, I'm going to continue working on this until I get it right. It seems like he builds this building. This one doesn't look like a Merkut at all, does it? This one is called the Maidum Merkut, or the Maidum Pyramid is what you'll hear it called. Now, at this time, it is believed that he does excavate all of the sand from underneath, and he's building on bedrock as he should. But he doesn't actually tie the outside of the building properly into the interior of the building. Can you see it's not really that, there are not that many steps? You can't just lay the stone on top of the other stone. It's not going to stay either. And so you see this rubble around the base? That is actually the limestone casing. So this is an error. So now, Great Seneferu seems to have figured out how to build the great flat-sided Merkut. In his next building, he is going to properly excavate the sand from underneath. He's even going to build it in a manner that you can properly tie the exterior into the interior. He then builds this building, known as the Red Merkut. And it's called the Red Pyramid or the Red Merkut today because at sundown, when you look at it, it looks red. This is the world's first true Merkut with its flat sides. It is a beautiful building. And it is Seneferu that leads to this structure. Seneferu could not be stopped. Seneferu decided that he would not be foiled, and he builds 3 Merkuti. Can I ask you an important question, a personal question? How many broken Mirkuts do you have in your life? How many times have you decided that you failed in public? People saw you fail so that you wouldn't try anymore. How many times have you decided that there's something that you must accomplish and you were turned away because your first attempt, and maybe even your second attempt, was a failure? Well, great Senefru was saying to you, if there is a calling that you have in your life, if there is something that you must do because it intrigues you, in fact, if there is something that I say you must be, that you are being divinely ordained to do, you must do it. Don't let your challenges prevent you from reaching excellence. The life of Senefru tells us this. And I think it's very interesting that most people do not know his name. Senefru was perhaps my favorite ruler in all of Kemetic history because of his ability to continue to strive towards excellence, even though he realized something that most people don't realize. Excellence is not a destination, it's a journey. And that is what he does. He takes that amazing journey. Now, you might find something interesting. What does this building look like to you? Does it look like another building? What would you say it looks like? When you first saw the picture, what did you think it was?
The Great Pyramid.
You probably thought it was the Great Pyramid, right?
Yeah.
Who built the Great Pyramid? Come on, we talked about this earlier. Take your left hand. Put your left hand downward. Take your right hand. Have it facing upward. Inspect your right hand. Look at all its lines and its contours. And then slowly, no, not slowly, quickly slap the left hand because you are not doing your reading.
Khufu.
Khufu builds the Great Mirkut. Who is Khufu? The son of Senefru. Can you imagine that this incredible structure that is the only remaining of the 7 wonders of the world couldn't be considered a meditation to the excellence of his father? This is an amazing story when you actually think about it in that context. That Khufu would not have been able to build that amazing building were it not for the trials and tribulations of his father, Senefru. This is of critical importance. Here is the Great Mirkut. Now I'm going to tell you the Great Mirkut is much larger than the Red Mirkut. The Great Mirkut should be considered in many ways a skyscraper in the sky. Like I said to you, it takes 23 years to build. Khufu continues to build this in excellence for all of this time, and then at the end of his reign, it's believed that he was buried in it. This building is 2.5 million blocks, ranging in weight from about 2 tons to about 15 tons. Its base is the width of 13 football fields. It was the tallest building on Earth for more than 2,000 years. And in fact, these stones are placed so perfectly that you cannot fit a piece of paper in between them. That's how perfectly Khufu builds his building. With no mortar, they're simply placed in excellence on top of each other. And even as we see this amazing building today, understand that it is still in decrepit form. Because later, when the Arabs come to Kemet, guess what they do? They decide that they are going to tear its finely polished limestone exterior away to build medieval Cairo. That's one of the reasons why I say that those people were not the ancient people. There's so many reasons we know that they aren't. But clearly, if they had great reverence for those structures built by their ancestors, they would not have defiled them. And so let me say to you that the great work of Khufu is of critical importance in our understanding of the history of ancient Kemet. So, as we look at the great Merkut and we understand the journey of these great individuals as they actually drive towards excellence, just remember we are looking at a structure that is absolutely not something that was built by foreign people. It was absolutely not something built by aliens, and it was absolutely not built by enslaved people. This is of critical importance as we continue to tell this important story. So let me see. Okay. I want you to actually see a very short piece that I did. A very short lecture I did in front of the great Merkut just a few years ago.
This is number one. Look on side. Look right here. Look. Really quickly, what we're seeing is one of the most incredible engineering feats.
We can't see it.
Also keep in mind that this was done nearly 5,000 years ago. Incredible African geniuses. Your ancestors created this incredible monument. Now, we talked on the bus about the fact that...
Brother, you know we can't see it?
An amazing work.
No. Oh, I wasn't sharing my screen.
No.
Oh my goodness. I'm glad you told me.
Decrepit shape, correct? Remember we had that conversation?
Whew, the trials and tribulations of doing this via Google Meet. Here we go.
This is number one. Look on side. Look right here. Look. Really quickly, what we're seeing is one of the most incredible engineering feats in the history of mankind. And we need to also keep in mind that this was done nearly 5,000 years ago by incredible African geniuses. Your ancestors created this incredible monument. Now, we talked on the bus about the fact that while this is beautiful and just an amazing work, it's in decrepit shape, correct? Remember we had that conversation? Mm-hmm. You'll notice that here, you'll see a smooth area. This is where some of the polished Tura limestone casing is still intact. And so look at that and imagine that it would have been just like this, going all the way up the Merkut. Now, something else you need to keep in mind is this. This hasn't been polished in nearly 5,000 years. Looks pretty shit. You still has a sheen on it? Mm-hmm. Can you imagine what it would look like when it was completed during the reign of King Khufu? You would probably had quite a bit of difficulty approaching it in the sun because it would have been that incredible. And also keep in mind, like we said before, that there's no mortar here. They didn't use plaster, they didn't use mortar, they didn't use super glue. They simply placed the blocks so precisely that the weight of the blocks held them together. You can't even fit a piece of paper in between those blocks. And it would even be difficult to fit a piece of paper in between the coarse regular blocks. I'm not even just talking about the limestone, because some people might think that you can do whatever you want on the inside and just make it look on the outside, right? A lot of us are actually walking around like that today too. Look great on the outside, but if someone gets a little bit close, they can see how messed up you are, right? That's not how they did this. You'd have trouble fitting the point of a penknife in between these stones. And on average, the stones are around 2.5 tons. 2.5 tons. Your average SUV is probably about 1.5 tons. So think about what we're talking about. They didn't have hydraulics. They didn't have cranes. We don't really know exactly how they did it, to be honest. But we know that what was done was incredible. Now, I asked a question before, How tall do you think this is? Is there a student that wants to hazard a guess? How tall do you think it is in feet?
484.
Did you do some reading? Incredible! This young man said that he believes the Great Merkut is 484 feet. He's off by 3 feet. It was 481 feet. Today it's about, let's give him a hand. Because he did research. He researched the question. Now, today it's about 30 feet lower, and you'll notice that they've also placed a few metal poles at the top to give you an approximation on how tall it really was. And they believe it took about 20 years to build. Now, some of you may have heard rumors about slaves building them. Oh man, isn't it a shame they got the slaves to build them? One coworker said that to me once when I told him I was coming to Egypt. Now, that's almost like you forcing someone to build you a car. No matter how much you put pressure on that person, they're going to have a really rough time with that kind of engineering. This was done by skilled labor, probably during the period when they weren't so working on the field. Because remember, there was this great inundation that we'll talk about later. They couldn't work in their fields during that inundation. So they would have probably worked on this Merkut. And that's how it was probably built. So you are seeing Khufu on the horizon. One of the, by the way, it's the only remaining wonder of the 7 wonders of the world. Everything else has been lost to antiquity. It's the only one that's left here. And it's left here because your ancestors decided that they were going to build it for eternity. Now, why do you think they built it for eternity?
Because that's just how we do it.
I think it's because they knew there'd be a time that we forgot our names. They knew that there'd be a time when we couldn't call our home home. They knew that there'd be a time when other people would have usurped our reign. But you're here today because out of all the trials and tribulations that African people have faced throughout the diaspora, we're returning to reclaim our legacy. Isn't that exactly why we're here? We need to know what we did before so we know what we're able to do in the future.
So, I truly hope that you got a sense of my excitement too, right? You know, whenever I'm at, whenever I get to Kemet, it's interesting. I forget to eat, I forget to sleep. If my queen doesn't actually say, hey, you know, he has to get some food. I go, oh, yeah, I didn't eat today. But she's like, you know, okay, we'll stop talking now. It's time for him to sleep. I'm like, yeah, I only slept 2 hours that night. This stuff makes me fly. Because when I think about what these great Africans did, it is as inspiring as any story that you could possibly imagine. And so I hope that you get a sense of how amazing it is to stand at the foot of the only remaining wonder of the 7 wonders of the world, at what should be considered one of the greatest accomplishments of human beings, and definitely one of the greatest accomplishments of your African ancestors. So, yes, please go ahead.
Peace. I actually had the opportunity 6 months ago to visit Kemet with Brother Yasser.
Really?
Yes, it was.
Wow.
I have to agree with you. Standing in front of the Merkut was just unbelievable. The whole time we were like, wow.
Yeah. I was supposed to be on that trip with him. He told me off, so
yeah,
I was supposed to be there as well. He actually has been taking people there for longer than I have. It is really an amazing experience to get to see these things on your own. And so I really admonish you, if you're interested, that you should take these amazing journeys as well. There is something different that happens when you get to actually stand in front of them.
Man.
It's amazing. So we see what Khufu did, right? It's absolutely amazing. We were talking briefly about his children, were we not? Does anyone remember what the name of his eldest son was? We said it earlier in the class. I said it a few times.
Menkare or
Caffrey. Caffrey and Jeffrey.
Caffrey.
No, the Jeffrey.
There we go. Jedefra and Kafra. Good answer. So take a look at this. After we see Khufu bring the great Merkut into existence as in many ways a meditation to the excellence of his father, then we see his sons come forward. Because you know that as you look at the great Merkut that sits on that area that is today called the Giza Plateau, there are 3 Merkuti there, right? You're familiar with that, correct?
Yes.
So as you look at that, you need to understand that in many ways, the entire Giza Plateau is a meditation of men on the excellence of their fathers, standing on their shoulders and reaching higher. So the first son, the eldest son, was a man named Jedef Ra, or sometimes called Rada Jeff. By the way, when you hear me say Ra, you can also hear Ray, right? Because it depends on how you translate the glyphs there. It's either Ra or Ray. So you're seeing Jedef Ra on the side here. He actually built a smaller Merkut at a different place, I think it's probably about 10 miles away, called Abu Rawash today. Abu Rawash. His Merkut has been completely destroyed. When the Arab folks came during the Arab invasion of Kemet, they came and they peeled off the Tura limestone, and his Merkut pretty much disintegrated. It looks kind of like this now. Can you see that pile of rubble? That's what it looks like.
Wait a minute. Yeah. Okay.
It's a small picture, I know. And so Jedef Ra does not rule for very long. When his reign comes to an end after what some people believe was just 8 years, his brother comes to reign. Also the son of Khufu. His name is Khafra or Khafre. He built a smaller Merkut next to his father, but he built it at a higher elevation, so that sometimes it is believed, some people when they look at it, they can't tell which one is the great Merkut. Well, you have to know that the Khafra's Merkut still has some of its limestone casing. So it looks like that. Can you see it still has some casing on the top?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how you can tell Khufu's Merkut from Khafra's Merkut. Now, Khafra's Merkut, once again, is not as large, but it's built at a higher elevation, so that what you could do is you can see that their heights actually meet. If you had a gigantic metal pole from one to the other, the pole would be almost level. Can you imagine doing that? Can you imagine trying to build a building on one side of the street and going to the other side of the street and trying to build a building that is exactly the same height? Now what happens when you realize that the building on the other side of the street is either in a valley or on a hill? You know what kind of surveying and architectural and engineering excellence you have to be able to do that? Amazing. This is what Khafra does. And then Khafra's son, Menkaura, also called Menkaure. By the way, well, let me continue, and then I'll say what I was just going to say. Menkaura, the son of Khafra, then builds the smallest of the Merkuti. And he does something very interesting, because the bottom of his Merkut is built of red granite, so it looks very different. And the inside is a little bit more defined as well. So while it's smaller, it actually is absolutely amazing. And so this is the image of Menkaura's Merkut. This is an amazing, amazing, amazing. What happened? Why did I just do that? An amazing way for us to understand what these great men did. Oh goodness, now my computer's slow. And so I want you to understand that when you look at the Merkuti, what you are actually seeing is great men referencing their fathers. Can you imagine what that's like, particularly at a time when many men of African descent struggle because we either don't know or don't have strong relationships with our fathers? Well, look at how we did it when we were on top of the world. Very different. Very, very different. These are the messages that we must take from these great stories, so that we are able to emulate the greatness of these great individuals. That is how we are actually going to get to the point where we are once more on top of the world. So it's 9:30. We're coming to a close. I just want to cover just a little bit more, if you indulge me. I want to talk about the end of the Old Kingdom. Now, keep in mind, there's no way for me in a class to talk about each of the rulers, because there are over 300 kings in 30 dynasties. That would take forever. So your reading is going to be critically important here. I'm going to show you some of the most important points, and we're going to have discussions around the rest of it. Does that make sense? So I hope that you read about the sun pyramids, the sun Merkuti of the 5th dynasty. If you haven't read it, do your reading. Okay? Do your reading. Can I ask an honest question? How many of you did not complete the reading? And the reason why I'm asking is because I don't want to just give you pages that you don't get to do. I want you to read it so we're able to have a conversation. So if a lot of you didn't get to have it, I'm gonna try not to give you a bunch more. Okay? I see Sen TC says he completed about half of it. Did the rest of you complete the reading at least in Chronicles of the Pharaohs? Yes? Okay. Okay, that's good. That's good. Because we're going to give you more. Okay? But I don't want to continue to give you so much more so that what happens is you are overwhelmed and you never do the reading. I want you to be able to get to the reading. Okay. So let's talk about the end of the Old Kingdom. Please keep in mind that we are not spending a lot of time. We will at some point, we'll go back and talk about the kings of the 5th dynasty, because they built some very interesting Merkuti. Their buildings actually have writing on the inside. Merkutu. Their buildings actually have writing on the inside. And so we are going to see those and talk about those, because the writing on the inside makes up the world's oldest spiritual text. Did you hear what I just said? The writing on the inside of those Merkutu make up the world's oldest spiritual text. They are generally called today the pyramid text. The world's oldest spiritual text, and we should be reading it, because if we read it, we'd get a better understanding of Kemetic spirituality. And in addition to that, we would also understand just how much the Abrahamic traditions have to owe the ancient African traditions. And so it's of critical importance that we become more familiar with them. So the Old Kingdom of Kemet continues to hum along. And then we get to the ruler who rules for the longest period in human history. Can you see my screen? I hope you can. His name, this king, is Pepi II. We mentioned him a little while ago. Pepi II comes to the throne at the age of 6. His mother actually serves as his regent because he is so young. His mother's name is Ankh-Nesmerire II. And you're actually seeing a statue of him on her lap. This is a beautiful statue in alabaster. Absolutely amazing. We're going to talk more about what the meaning of the statue is in just a few moments. So Pepi II rules for it's believed he ruled for about 94 years. And as a young child, he actually sends one of his officials to Nubia on an expedition to find out more about the origins of the Kemetic people. And his official, a man, he's actually a general in the army, writes a letter back to him. The man's name is Harkuf. Harkuf. He writes a letter back to him saying that he actually found a tiny person, a person that has that in recent history was called a dwarf, which is a pejorative term today. A tiny person, a little person he found. And you should know that Pepe was very interested in meeting him because he had heard that the world's earliest people were the smallest people. Who was he referring to?
I don't want to use the diminutive form of the word. I don't know a better word for it.
Send that Charity, you can use it and then we'll fix it.
Pygmies?
They're often called the pygmies, right? And that is a pejorative form of the word. It's helpful to know who you're talking about, then we'll fix it, right? They should be called the Khoi San people. And they are some of the tiniest people. They tend to have some of the tiniest people on the planet, right? So obviously the Kemetic people understood that the earliest people actually were very tiny people. And so he sends a letter back to Harkuf saying, please make sure that you take care of this tiny man. I want him to teach me the dance of the divine, which is the dance of the original people. So this is a really interesting story, a really interesting letter. He says, when he goes to drink in the river, make sure you have 2 people hold his arm so he doesn't fall in. When he's in his tent at night, make sure you have soldiers outside so that an animal doesn't come in and carry him off. Make sure that he is cared for so that he arrives here safely because he wanted to meet. And I want you to understand that he's talking about, he wants to meet the original African. That's what he's saying. He wants to meet the original people. That is the conversation that Pepe II in his young age is having with his general Harkuf.
How old was he?
When he wrote the letter, I believe he was 10 or 11. But when he comes to rule, he is at the age of 6. He also sends expeditions to an area that sometimes we call Punt today. This is the area where the Kemetic people say they had their origin truly. And it's believed that it is someplace around the area of Ethiopia, Somalia, or Kenya, in that region of Africa. They say that's where they came from. Before they moved forward, that is where they were. Before they moved northward, or as they would have considered southward, that is where their people lived. He actually lives until a very, very old age. It's believed that he may actually make his transition at around the age of 110 or 100 years old, someplace around there. And at that time, it's also believed that maybe his advanced age might have led to decentralized power in Kemet, and it might actually lead to Kemet actually falling apart. There's some people who make that argument, that because he was not young enough to continue to rule the nation in vigor, he was delegating a lot of his authority to a lot of his nobles. And so when he dies, there are many, many different reigns of power, and they are not able to coalesce into a central figure that is able to rule the land. We're going to talk more about what happens during this next period, called the First Intermediate Period, next week. But I want you to recognize that even though he rules for so long, there are only probably 3 statues of him that remain. And the one you're seeing here is in the Brooklyn Museum. It is beautiful. Some of you have actually probably seen the statue at the Brooklyn Museum. You might have even come on a tour with me to see it, right? I know Sanette Tara was on a tour at the Brooklyn Museum and saw it herself. So as you look at this statue, before we close, I want you to not just understand it in its historic stage. I want you to get a sense of what our African ancestor is saying about it. What is the commentary? What does the statue look like to you, family?
Mary and child.
Breastfeeding.
It looks like what is sometimes called the Madonna and child statue in the Christian tradition, right? And it also, sometimes we say that it's a statue of a mother breastfeeding their child, right? clearly it is a reference to Ast and Heru, the individuals, the divine individuals that the Greeks later call Isis and Horus. But I want you to even understand it something else that's being said here. Do you notice that Pepe is really tiny on the statue right on his mother's lap? If you look closely at Pepe there, you're going to notice that Pepe is not a child. He's an adult on his mother's lap. I think that's quite curious. I think that's quite curious. So he's not suckling in the manner that you're seeing this great Maasai woman suckle her child. By the way, that child has no idea that a picture is being taken. This is the most comforting space that any human probably will ever lay in. But understand that when you look at Pepe, Pepe is actually an adult there. And clearly, this is can also be considered a reference to Mary and Jesus, right? By the way, this is an interesting statue that I took a picture of I think it was in Puerto Rico, actually. And it actually has the Black Madonna and a European-looking child. Very interesting to me. I wish I could talk more about that. We do not have the time to. But I do want you to recognize that if Pepe is an adult on his mother's lap, he is making a commentary. He is actually saying, my mother is my throne. Can you see how he's sitting? And in the way he's sitting, you can actually see he has his own footrest. There are almost two statues, one of Pepe facing in this direction, and one of Ankh Nesmarire facing this way. He is saying, my mother is my throne. I can only be the most powerful man in the world at this time because of my mother. My mother, who is the person that gave birth to me, remains the person who is greater than me.
Ashe.
That the lineage of royalty in Kemet is matrilineal. Family, if we still looked at the world this way, we wouldn't call women by derisive terms, bees and hoes. We wouldn't say that women should actually just follow the lead of their man because the man is the head of the home and the woman is just supposed to listen to them. We wouldn't say those things. There's that bunch of claptrap that we got caught with in the Western world. When Africans were in control of the world, they recognized the importance of their mother. In fact, the importance and the centrality of women. This is part and parcel of our ancient Kemetic story. And so next week, we're going to continue the discussion of Pepe II. We're going to talk a bit more about what he contributed to human history. And I truly hope that you will continue to not just get the historic story, because I want you to understand the historic story, but I also want you to get a sense of the meaning of the story. That's the higher charge, because if you understand the meaning, now you can truly attempt to emulate them. You can truly say, if this is how we actually did it when we were on top of the world, how must we do it now in order to once more become a powerful people? So I'm gonna give you more reading. Okay, you read to page 67. I'm going to ask you to read. I think you should read all the way through the Middle Kingdom. Is that fair? Maybe I won't make you read the entire Middle Kingdom. We'll actually get to page 89, right? That's not more than another 20 pages in this book, Chronicle of the Pharaohs. So please read to page.
Okay.
And I think you read to page, was it 42? In Sheikh Anta Diop's book? Yes? We on the same page? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I'm going to ask you to read. I wonder if that's too much. Well, let's see what you can do. I want you to read to page 84 in Sheikh Anta Diop's book. I want you to read the chapter on the modern falsification of history.
And how much in Chronicles again? Could you repeat that?
You're going to read to page 89 in Chronicles,
okay,
and to page 84 in the African Origin of Civilization. From page, I think you read to 42 in African Origins of Civilization, right? Yeah, you read to page, I think it was like 41 or 42. So you're going to read from 42 to 84 in African Origin of Civilization. Remember, Chronicles of the Pharaoh is a really good chronological story, but it still needs correcting in some ways. That's why we're reading these two books together. And so you're going to read this book as well. If the reading is difficult, good. If the information we're covering is difficult, good. Because I hope you didn't think that learning 3,000 years of history would be easy. Test your mettle here. Try to really focus and go further. You are so much more powerful than you know. Okay? In addition to that, I'm going to give you the slides that I just showed. They're going to be also included. And you're also going to get the video of our lecture in case you need to look at it again. Are we good? Yes?
Yes.
Questions? Any questions moving forward? Wonderful. Maybe once again, ask the ancestors and the Neteru to guide your study, to guide your steps, and to assist you as you continue on the journey of emulating these glorious Africans. Thank you so much. We will see you next week.
Ashe.
Ashe, ashe. And
Come on.
Ashe, Dua.
Dua.
Dua.